Sarah Coventry.
So I thought it would be worth you meeting all of us to begin with, because we are a big team. There are others of us on the team, two others, Janice Richardson, who's in Australia, and a very important person who's a member of the team, who will be with us in cyberspace, who is our artist on the project, also in Australia, but with us through Skype today, Carolyn Bowditch. So we'll welcome her a little bit of time. So just briefly more about the project. You've heard a bit about the project. It's 3 years, very generously funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. This is the end of year 2. What characterises this project, and what has been so exciting for us on this project, is this bringing together of two very different disciplines. So we've had this fabulous opportunity to find out about each other's languages, the way in which we view the world, the way in which we talk about the work we see, our philosophies and everything else. Of course, we come from very different places. So in this meeting place, in this intersection between dance and law, we're beginning to have, and we have had over the course of our project so far, some really fascinating conversations. And most importantly, this project is about how can we, in this project, make a difference. And the difference we want to make is as far as we possibly can, to the experience of professional dance artists with disabilities, working as makers, working as performers. How can we help to make a difference? And it's because throughout our previous journeys coming into this project, all of us involved have had a number of questions that have been troubling us. Questions to do with why is it that dancers with disabilities are less visible within our professional dance workforce, and particularly why is there an absence of dance leaders with disabilities? We're troubled by the fact that there are still barriers to participation in training, in education, in tertiary and higher education for students and dancers with disabilities. We're troubled by what seems to be a lack of critical engagement with the work. How can we enhance the language around this work so that the work becomes something which, as Kate said, leaves a legacy for this work? How does it enter our records of cultural heritage? And we're also, I think, partly troubled by the fact that all of us, to some extent, have been involved in these sorts of conversations for a long time. And we do see circular conversations. And even though we have those conversations and we all want to see change, it's actually really hard to really make change. So what are the ways in which we can do that? Hence today. And it's fantastic that we have so many of you representing not only dance and law, but a wide range of industry sectors, and that's fantastic, because what we want to do today is to make sure that we are asking the right questions, and on the schedule you'll see some of the questions that we posed for today. And hopefully, by the end of the day, have some new questions, and you can tell us whether or not we're asking the right sort of questions. And this is why we need your help, please. So we've got a very, very full and busy day. We thought long and hard about how to schedule today. It's only one day, and we want to cover a lot. So we decided the best way to do that is to bring as many different people into the space and into the conversation as possible. Hence, we've decided on a series of panels. We're enormously grateful to those of you who've agreed to be on our panels. We're very privileged to have a lot of experts here today who are prepared to share their views, their experiences with us. Thank you. So each panel has somebody who's going to offer a position statement or a provocation, and then the panelists are going to respond to that brief introductory provocation presentation. And then there'll be a conversation, ably chaired by a chair, and then it will be open to the floor. So we do want to make sure there's an opportunity for open discussion. We also have, we didn't want to do a day about dance without having dance included. So we have, in the middle of the day, we have a film being shown downstairs by a dance artist who spent many years in this country working with Can Do but is now in New Zealand, Suzanne Khan. Her film is shown. We also have a number of dancers here in the space who are showing works in progress in various stages of development. So that feels like a really important part of the day. We then conclude the day with a coming together, with a chance to just review where we've got to, reflect on the day, and hopefully give us lots of things to take away from the day that we can move forward into our final year. I want to say, of course, at this point, thank you to a lot of people who've made today possible. All our speakers, all our panellists, everybody who's helped pull today together. My colleagues at Coventry University have come down for the day. Particularly, I want to say thank you to our research assistants who've been amazing, and all of you will know Karen very well because she's been fantastic in organising all of the scheduling and everything else for today. And inevitably there are a few practical things I need to just make sure we're all aware of. Please make sure your mobile phones are turned to silent. We do have Bruce Tetlow here. I don't know if you want to just put your hand up. Thanks, Bruce. Bruce is here as our audio describer today. So if anybody would like to speak to Bruce about that, or ask for his help at all during today, please do so. Or even if you're just curious about that as a process. We do have Wi-Fi here, but we have a little bit of a plea that if everybody's on Wi-Fi, we can't stream today because there's not enough. What's the word? Thank you. Something technical. It doesn't work. So we don't want to be scuppered by technology, which always seems to get in the way of these things. So if you don't absolutely have to be on Wi-Fi, please don't be, and then we can stream today so more people can get to experience today by actually being here. There is a code. I'm reluctant to give it to you now. I can't say it. But if you do absolutely have to go on, the username is SDD Wi-Fi, so that's pretty easy. SDD Wi-Fi, and the password is SDD, and that's uppercase, SDD Studios lowercase. Now forget that. Other things just to mention, I think most of you probably found the loos. They're on the first floor and the ground floor. Fire exits there. And
maybe that one here, just run up there, you get into a little cavey thing, and then take a left, right and right, and then you end up in a really cute little square. And that's where we'll rest you.
Thank you for that, that's fantastic. There's no fire job plan for today, so I'm afraid if it does go off, it's real. Catering, we have our catering downstairs in the parlour, which is where the film is showing as well. We will be taking some photographs of the event today because we do want to record, so I hope that's all right. We would ask anybody who tweets to tweet. That's the right thing to say. See, I'm not very experienced in this. But we do have a very lively social media presence for the project, thanks to the much more capable members of the team than myself. And we would love to know how today has been for you, and of course come and tell us, either today or after today. But you will see at the back of the space there are a number of postcards with a tantalising beginning of a sentence, and we would love you to finish the sentence and then deposit the postcard into the box that's there. That would be brilliant. There's also some blanks, so if the half sentence doesn't appeal, just write anything anyway, please. We would love to have your thoughts from today. I think and hope I've covered everything. Right. So now we can begin with our first panel. And I do hope today is a very stimulating day for you. Thank you. Right, so if I can invite the members of the first panel to come up, and while you're coming up, we will just log in with Caroline in Australia over Skype. I should have Caroline's in Australia. We've got Stina, Fiona, Ruth, and Jane Pritchard. Oh, wow. So do come up. Do put yourself where you would like to. And we have Caroline here. So
So we're going to start off. We just wanted to welcome. We wanted to welcome Caroline. I'm not sure we can actually hear her at the moment. We'll be able to do one moment. Okay. So we wanted to welcome Caroline. We're going to see her presentation that she prepared earlier. It's one of these things she prepared earlier, which is fantastic because we didn't quite discuss the technology. And it may be that Caroline will have to join us not on video for the discussion, but only on sound. It depends, I think, a little bit on how our bandwidth goes. But anyway, we wanted to show you, say, hi Caroline, delighted to have you with us. Okay, so let me just introduce the members of the panel. We've got Caroline Bowditch, who is, as Sarah said, she is an integral part of our Invisible Difference team. She describes herself as performance artist and choreographer. And we have Stina Nilsson, who is the Kanduku Artistic Co-Director. We have Fiona McMillan, who's Professor of Intellectual Property Law at Birkbeck. We have Ruth Gould, who is Artistic Director of DadaFest. And we have Jane Pritchard, who is Curator of Dance at the Victoria and Albert Museum. I'm very sorry to say that Jane Hackett unfortunately can't be with us. She emailed this morning to say that she wasn't feeling very well. But I'm kind of hoping that she might be watching us on watch this being streamed. But anyway, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome the members of the panel here. I'm not going to say any more about them now because I think when in their responses to Caroline's presentation, I think it will become sort of quite clear as to what the positions that they take around the question that we are asking in this panel, which we posed, which really is something that runs sort of very, very deeply through what we are doing as an Invisible Difference project, which is the question or the statement that disability dance and cultural heritage, dance made and performed by dancers with disabilities, is almost entirely absent from our cultural heritage. And the question is why? And that was the question that we asked this particular panel to address. So we're going to start with Caroline's presentation. I'm not sure if we can have, I don't think we can have you up on the screen at the same time, Caroline, as we're watching your presentation this end. But hopefully you'll still be able to hear us anyway. So we're going to run Caroline's presentation, and she had some provocative questions at the end that I think the members of the panel have been thinking about. Now, members of the panel are limited to 10 to 15 minutes, and I'm going to be pretty tough with the time, because we really, really want to hear your input as well. And the more provocative, I think, the better. So, no input in this. Okay, so here we go. So,
hi, I'm Caroline Bowditch, and I'm really sorry that I can't be there with you for the conference, but I'm here in these beautiful surroundings on our family farm in the middle of the Victorian countryside in Australia. I have the privilege of being one of the visiting professors at Coventry University and am one of the artists being followed as part of the Invisible Difference project. I'm going to make you a PowerPoint presentation, so from here on in you'll hear my voice, but you won't necessarily see my face. But this is where I am. I hope the conference goes really well, and I'll see you on Skype in So I've been asked to speak about disability dance and cultural heritage, and this is a topic that I'm particularly interested in and have been fascinated actually in doing research in preparation for today's presentation, and didn't realise just how connected I really was to it all. Earlier this year I made a little piece called Falling in Love with Frigga, which we have presented in Scotland, in England, in Sweden, and it had a week-long run at Edinburgh Festival in August, before going to the South Bank to be part of Unlimited Festival. The reason I talk about Frigga and this piece particularly is because Falling in Love with Frigga, for me, was about reclaiming Frida Kahlo as a disabled artist. She has a name that is known the world over, and she is one of the highest fetching female artists, definitely in the world. But very rarely do we think about her or claim her as a disabled artist. But her disability was implicit in all of her work. I was reclaiming her as part of my cultural heritage, and as a result of that, we went on as a team, and this is the team of people that I worked with, this is not the complete team, but some of them, to win a Herald Angel at Edinburgh Festival. The chances of winning one of the awards we worked out is 0.3%. They give out 10 awards every year, and we were lucky enough to win one. When I spoke to Mary Brennan, who was the journalist responsible for awarding us a Herald Angel, she said to me sometimes, she said, I don't really believe in awards, but sometimes I think they're necessary to make people look at a piece that they might not otherwise look at. I think that's really relevant to the conversation that we're about to have. So in thinking about this, in thinking about dance, disability and cultural heritage, Charlotte asked us 3 questions to think about. Why is dance made and or performed by dancers with disabilities almost entirely absent from our cultural heritage? What factors have led us here, and what might be done to remedy it? I thought it might be useful by starting with some definitions. Let's not worry about the definition of dance, because we could be here all day, as you know. But I thought it might be interesting to share with you a definition of disability that I recently found in the WHO's World Report on Disability. It defines disability as being something that results from the interaction between persons with impairments and attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. I think what this definition does really nicely is it doesn't separate the body that lives with impairment from the world that they live in. So it's not specifically medical model, but it's also acknowledging social model. So it's very much a meeting of those 2 things. We are not devoid of our bodies, but the ways that we are able to work with them is very much affected by the world in which we interact. So moving on to also defining cultural heritage, because I think that's also important to know, what are we talking about when we talk about cultural heritage? Well, that fine source of information, Wikipedia, defines cultural heritage as the legacy of physical artefacts and intangible attributes of a group or society that are inherited from past generations, maintained in the present and bestowed for the benefit of the future generations. It goes on to say that cultural heritage is unique, irreplaceable and beautiful. And I really like this definition that I found by John Feather that says cultural heritage is a human creation intended to inform. These last 2 definitions make me feel that disabled performers should strongly be embedded in our cultural heritage if we are viewing it from these perspectives. Simon Thurley, who is the Executive Director of English Heritage, talks about heritage as being about the future, really. It's not about the past. People think in heritage we want to stop things happening. What we actually want is to make sure that the very best parts of our nation's past become parts of our future. If heritage is about preserving our best parts for the future, maybe the best has yet to come for disabled artists, especially. Or maybe disabled artists haven't been producing anything worth preserving. So what, who, and or how does one decide what becomes part of our cultural heritage? I came across this very handy like this. Again, that's come from Simon Thurley. It has these 4 parts. It talks about by understanding cultural heritage, people value it. By valuing it, people want to care for it. By caring for it, we'll help people to enjoy it. And from enjoying it comes a thirst to understand. I think if you think about this cycle, from a disability and dance perspective, there are several breaks. And I think the first one comes between the first and the second parts of this cycle. By understanding it, people value it. Anne Cooper Albright came up with these 2 beautiful quotes that I think are very relevant, even though she published them in 1998. She talked about the fact that as a dancer, a disabled dancer, I am a body on display. As a body on display, I am expected to reside within a certain continuum of fitness and bodily control, not to mention sexuality and beauty. But as a woman in a wheelchair, I am neither expected to be a dancer nor to position myself in front of an audience's gaze. She goes on to say, when a disabled dancer takes to the stage, he or she stakes a claim to a radical space, an unruly location where desperate assumptions about representation, subjectivity, and visual pleasure collide with one another. As a performer, I have a non-traditional dance body. I don't fit the usual dance aesthetic, and even though we are 14 years on from when Anne Cooper Albright wrote this article, I think many of the same thoughts and disability dance's place in society remains the same. We continue to be underrepresented and unexpected on many mainstream stages without a specific disability context surrounding our performance. Alistair Spalding, Artistic Director at Sadler's Wells, recently described disability dance as being a genre. As Barbara McKee, also known as Chairgirl, says on her blog site, disability culture is unique in the aspect that it crosses all economic, gender and race barriers. No one is considered exempt from becoming disabled. I would say the same about dance and disability. It is not limited to a technique or style. It's definitely not a genre, and it is as individual as the people making and performing it. Our next point is about, by valuing it, people want to care for it. Kathleen Tolan wrote in an article, We Are Not a Metaphor, for the American Theatre magazine in 2001, in the same way that the Black Power movement in the 1970s insisted on the unique power and beauty of African Americans, or the women's movement empowered women to expose stereotypes and tell their own stories, the disability rights movement and crip culture are challenging our perceptions about what it is to be human. So how is disabled dance valued? Well, in Scotland, where I'm lucky enough to live, over the past 4 years, over £400,000 has been invested in deaf and disabled artists. Equality is embedded into Creative Scotland's funding priorities, and every applicant is asked about access and their commitment to equality. There is specific funds also available to cover access costs for applicants. This embedding makes me feel valued as a disabled artist in Scotland. So much so that I recently realised that I'm not sure I can call myself a disabled artist anymore, as I don't feel my choices or opportunities are limited. I feel that the playing field has and is gradually being levelled, and this excites me greatly. think that you all being at this conference and the work that is happening at Coventry University, specifically led by Sarah Watley, and the careful gathering of information and cultural heritage that's being done by Gil Williams, is setting a precedence and is showing care. I think the Invisible Difference Project is trying to claim the cultural heritage and is supporting disabled artists to do this. The fact that Candico Dance Companies and Who Shall Go to the Ball has just become one of the prescribed works for students to study at GCSE level dance is a huge step forward in the embedding of dance and disability and the work that's been going on. And there is a National Disability Arts Collection and Archive, which will bring to life the heritage and rich history of the disability arts movement. It's led by disabled people and disability arts organisations all over the UK, and it will provide an important resource for disabled people to realise their own heritage and bring non-disabled people closer to the struggles that have been faced over the last 30 years. This year we saw the second run of Unlimited, or the second round of Unlimited funding, which was initially started in 2012 as part of the cultural programme connected to the Olympics in London. Unlimited, again, the Unlimited Festival was held in September at the South Bank Centre in London. So many of the shows at Unlimited sold out. Tickets became as rare as hen's teeth, and this happened 2 weeks in advance of the festival beginning. This is unprecedented. Falling Level 3 was co-commissioned by the SICK Festival, based in Brighton. SICK Festival is all about addressing or presenting work made by addressing or including disabled performers. And again, all the shows for the 2-week run of SICK sold out. We were told, we did one performance of Falling Love with Frida, and we were told that we could have had 4 shows in that week. There was that much demand. There is greater presence in mainstream festivals and presentation on main stages. Work is being presented on main stages by disabled dance artists. It does feel like there is a long-term significant development and support for disabled artists out there, and it feels like that is coming from our funding bodies. And higher quality work is being produced, and that's coming in connection with the fact that there is more significant investment being made in disabled artists. So this poses a series of questions for you. Cultural heritage tends to be something that a society appreciates and is proud of. My question is disability dance something that we are proud of? Is the lack of inclusion in cultural heritage why it regularly feels like we are reinventing the wheel in many arts projects? Is there something about the quality of work that has been produced that has meant its lack of inclusion in our cultural heritage before now? Does something become cultural heritage when it becomes valuable as a commodity to a society? And it's been fascinating for me being in Australia and realising that Australia's Indigenous artists, which make up, well, our Indigenous population makes up 1.7% of the Australian population. 50% of them are visual artists. The income generated by the sales of the art made by our Indigenous artists in 1998, so quite old statistics, but they were bringing in as much money to Australia, or it was as valuable to Australia as uranium. That's a fairly strong argument. Hence, there's been a lot more investment and greater awareness and appreciation of the work of Indigenous artists in Australia. My other question is, how are we supporting, generating and nurturing disabled leaders and artists to pass on a cultural heritage? I leave you with these questions. I pass them to the panel, and I will see you on Skype in a minute. Hello, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Thank you. You just had a very warm round of applause for what was a very interesting and provocative opening to our conference, our symposium here. So thank you, Caroline. That was excellent. So we're going to leave you up on screen. We're not going to have stream you live at the moment, I think, but you're up on screen with us, and we can hear you from this end as well. I'm not going to ask for points or questions yet, because I want to give our panelists a chance to respond first. But there will be plenty of time for discussion when they've had their chances to comment and respond to Caroline's questions. So do think about what you would like to ask in due course. So with that, I think, Stina, I'm going to ask you to come up first and give us your thoughts on what has been said.
Hello, testing out this microphone. Testing out this microphone. Hello.
I quite like having a handheld on. Now you can hear me. Yes, thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. Thank you to Caroline for setting the tone for the day with that presentation on dance disability and cultural heritage. So my name is Stina Nielsen. I am artistic co-director of Kamduga Dance Company. Kamduga Dance Company is a world-renowned contemporary dance company of disabled and non-disabled artists. It's been going since 1991. And when seeing the presentation from Caroline and being asked to respond, so many questions and so many thoughts, and made me go and look at what cultural heritage is. Because it made me realise that this is a really interesting intersection of bringing dance and dance and disability particularly into this question around law, copyright, but also cultural heritage. Is it something that we are all part of in our daily lives, in our in the arts and culture that we see in our contemporary society, or does it go so much further back? And of course it does. And I was reading up on how UNESCO was dividing the tangible arts, the objects, the buildings, the gardens, the London, the UK, the gardens and the heritage sites that we sort of know of. And then only just recently, in 2001, 2003, they sort of also labelled the intangible arts, so the drama and the dance and the music and the oral traditions. And of course, I made me think about indigenous dances. I'm from Norway, so the traditional Norwegian folk dances, that part of the cultural heritage that I consider to be heritage. But in the history of time, 2003 is very recent. So it's very recent actually to think that dance has been acknowledged as really important in our cultural heritage as something intangible, something maybe less static and less possible to both understand and possibly value, as Caroline draws attention to. And so in terms of value and in terms of responding to some of the questions that Caroline drew up, it made me think about visibility and the critical mass. We need to generate critical mass of disabled artists to create visibility, and that mass and that visibility has to be accompanied by making significant impact in terms of the quality of the work and in terms of how it touches people. So I think I wanted to touch on those two things, the sort of critical mass and how to make that visible, and then the significant impact that can have on people in order for it to become valuable. So going back into Kamduga's history and talking from the point of view of being aware of dance and disability, but coming from some examples from Kamduga. In 1991 it started And Celeste Alec and Adam Benjamin, who started it, was talking about how actually when it first started, it did cause outrage. People did say this is wrong, aesthetically it's not pleasing, you know. There were those comments that the dancers were just not right to put them on the stage. And at the same time, there was a real exciting sense of radical invention, of being pioneers of something different happening. So these two responses came out. So in terms of being proud of something, in terms of being proud of what's being created, at the time in 1991, there were some people that were really proud, but there were other people that were not proud. And so maybe the significance of whether a society is proud of how can we incorporate this into the cultural heritage, maybe the word proud is something that happens over time. In 91, it was very new, different, pioneering, groundbreaking, pushing the boundaries of what dance and disability was, what it looked like. And very quickly, actually, we lost Caroline, Arts Council started funding it. So again, a reference to Caroline's point about value. The fact that the Arts Council started funding it already in '94 with regular funding is quite significant in terms of the impact that it could have. So it could reach around the world. We made a film that was presented all around the world outside in by Victoria Marx, and it reached an international audience, which meant that also County were asked to travel abroad. And again, British Council supported it financially to go abroad, to be showcased around the world. And actually, fast forwarding to 2012 and the Cultural Olympiad, that what got Britain the Olympics and the Paralympics was something around diversity, was the proudness in Britain about Britain being a society that valued diversity and that brought disability art and disability culture right to the forefront in terms of the Cultural Olympiad, in terms of the work that's happening around the Olympics and the Paralympics. So there was definitely a very clear moment in terms of British cultural heritage where disability was very important in order for the UK to win the Olympic bid. And seeing how much Contiguo has travelled all around the world, there's a great sense of pride being the flagship company of the UK to present dance and disability around the world. And in most other countries that I've gone to, both developed countries like going to Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, they have nothing like it. There isn't anywhere around the world that has the level of disabled artists, the support for disabled artists, the push for access for everybody within the arts as the UK has. So there's something to be said that on a government level, although this is of course changing also with the cuts to the allowance funding, the cuts to access to work, and there might be very different pictures in the next year. But up until now, there has actually been real proudness, I think, on a national level, on an international level. How does that then practically relate to what we see on our stages in the UK? Well, there has been this question too, how do we get the work out to the national stages? So in '94, Alistair Spalding, who now is Executive Director of South West Wales, was the programme at South Bank Centre. And that's where Cefn did its first big public showing, was at the Elizabeth Hall in the South Bank Centre in '94, where we're going back in a couple of weeks. And it's really important for someone to take that chance, to take the risk, to make it visible to a bigger public. And again, I think it comes back to visibility, it comes back to the fact that Country Good had been going for about 3 years, they were generating the work, they were producing, they were pushing the quality of what they were trying to present, still choreographing from within the company, but Alistair took a chance to put that on the mainstream public dance space and to bring it out to people. And then Clement Chris, who was a ballet critic at the time, wrote a critic of it, wrote an article saying, well, this is all quite exciting, it's quite new, it's quite different. It would be interesting to see if they collaborated with some other professional choreographers. So it wasn't just from within, but maybe in relation out, put the tentacles out into the dance world and see what would come of that. And that is what Celeste did then. She picked up that kind of challenge and said, yes, I come from a dance background, I had an accident and I use a wheelchair, I'm passionate about dancing. And maybe it is that. Maybe it is that I want to try to do what I would have done anyway, but in a different way, in a more exciting way for me, and it's pushing what's other people can come and join into. So, quality of the work, again, I'm just referencing some of the questions that Caroline had. I think it's really important. The quality of the work is extremely important. How can the wider public relate to and value it and understand it if it looks very different from anything they've ever seen before? So, Kanduka worked with lots of different choreographers from around the world. They made quite new, bold, exciting work, always created originally, almost dancers, always the dancers having a really big impact on the process, so that was created was very much coming from them. And then at the 20th anniversary in 2011, with myself and Fred as artistic directors, we decided we wanted to tap into the history of dance. And so in the history of dance, again, contemporary dance is quite new. But one of the things that I consider the seminal work within contemporary dance is Trisha Brown's Set and Reset. It's a piece that was made in 1983, and it's a piece that deals very much with the logic of moving. So it deals with folding and swinging and the geometry of space and geometry within the body. And we wanted to rethink what there had been. So we wanted to be radical, not just by creating something new, but by getting people to rethink what was there and how could this not be assimilated or tried out and having to fit into the shape of someone else, but what could the principles of this extremely popular and successful work, what could it look like when it was then performed with disabled and non-disabled dancers? What would happen to that form? What would change? What would become new and different and innovative with that form in relation to something old? And what came was a very successful piece, Set and Reset. So it was restaged, working with the original cast from Trisha Brown, but working on the principles in this very space here, and trying to undo what the look of it was, what the shape of it was for particular bodies, and make that shape different, but maintain something about the quality of the process and the quality of the essence of that work. And it made me think of how, maybe I'm making a big sweeping statement now, but in terms of Matthew Bourne's reworking Swan Lake for men. And I think that was a major watershed for the general public to understand something about contemporary dance. Suddenly, contemporary dance was exciting and quite sexy, but it was a classic. It was Swan Lake, that there was a reference to something that they might have done before. And so I think one of the things Kanduka is trying to do is kind of wedge itself into mainstream dance to kind of go, hello, can you see that we can rethink what we think the norm is? Can you see that we can rethink what you think dance could look like, should look like? And also with that, can we also make you see that it doesn't have to just be rethinking, it can be completely new and innovative. Going back to the reference that Caroline made about the GCSE, the fact that we now have a piece by Rafael Bonacella that they made on the company here in 2007, on 2010, we actually recast it. So the film has gone out to about 200 schools around the country in similar amount of workshops. They see not the original cast, but a restaging. So Mark Brew had one of the original main roles. Mark Brew, who's now making his own choreography, and is a real great advocate for making his own work. He was recast. So again, we wanted to challenge the fact that can disabled artists only make new and original work that only can work on their body, or can actually they be pushing into training, pushing into further education, pushing into the mainstream? Can we rethink what that norm is so that it doesn't have to be a segregation, but it could just be part of what the ecology of dance is, part of what that training situation is to work with people with different bodies. So lastly, I just want to say that I think that also brings us on to the question around how do we support the next generation of leaders. So I was so excited about the fact that today we're seeing dance by disabled artists in this room, and they have in many ways had a connection to Kanduka, and Kanduka has in many ways had a connection to other companies around the world. How can we keep on generating this mass? That, I think, is the way we keep on building the next generation of leaders, is by pushing the quality of the work and keeping on making sure that the lived experience of being in the dance world, the quality of that lived experience of having access to the performance experience, having access to the training, having access to the advocacy, the talking about it is really important. So I'm going to stop talking there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Stina. I think there's a lot of very, very positive things in there, and some of the things that I picked out were proud, risk, visible, reaching out, quality, value, and new thinking. I'm going to go actually straight on to Fiona now and ask her to give her contribution to what Caroline and Stina.
Thank you, Charlotte. Let's see this forward. Everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much to Caroline, first of all. Sorry I'm out of sight, Caroline, but I need to put down my bits of paper somewhere. Thank you for this great framing of the issue. And thank you very much, the organisers, for inviting me to comment on it. My name is Fiona McMillan, and as I'm an academic, so I sit by myself a lot thinking about what cultural heritage might be and what intangible cultural heritage might be. And one of the things that I would love to talk about now is what's the relationship between radical space and cultural heritage. But instead I'm going to be good, like I always was at school, and do the homework which is allocated to me by responding to one of Caroline's questions, which is this question, the question that I want to respond to is this question: does something become cultural heritage when it becomes valuable as a commodity to a society? And by way of a beginning to that answer, or beginning to a comment on that question, I want to say something about the meaning or definition of cultural heritage, and particularly this Wikipedia definition, the first bit of the Wikipedia definition that Caroline used. Just to remind you, cultural heritage is the legacy of physical artifacts and intangible attributes of a group or society that are inherited from past generations, maintained in the present, and bestowed for the benefit of future generations. Now, what's a little bit buried in this formulation, and Caroline mentioned the same problem, are the questions of who decides what's cultural heritage? In other words, who decides what's worth maintaining in the present and passing on to the future? And what criteria they use to decide. So these days we generally say, okay, it's a community that decides what is this thing that's worth preserving and handing on to the future. So we have, from the very outset, a really malleable and slippery concept, according to which it's inevitable that what is considered preserving in the present and passing on to the future is implicated with the politics of the present. And it might be worth adding, while we're talking about the politics of the present, how much the politics of identity is reflected not only on how we define a community, but also on how a community decides what is worth passing on to the future. And then, of course, identity and community are multi-layered, multifaceted ideas. We all have multiple identities, and we all have multiple communities as well. Okay, so if cultural heritage is about expressing identity, which is what I think it is about, then this gives it a particular value, obviously. It gives it a particular value, not only because it might tell us who we are, but also because it allows us to tell other people who we are, and why we deserve to be particularly valued. I'm just speaking generally at the moment. So what does it mean to be particularly valued? And who controls the meaning of the value which is attached to particular forms of cultural heritage? Now, Caroline made this interesting parallel with Indigenous people in Australia that have had precisely this problem controlling. They've had a success with export of artworks, and then a very serious problem controlling the meaning associated with those artworks. Okay, now in the neoliberal environment, which I think unfortunately we all live in, where everything is subjective to what my colleague Emilios Christodoulidis has described as total market thinking, the obvious, or perhaps the only, way of expressing value is through commodification. And when we talk about commodification of artistic works, such as dance, then the relevant instrument of commodification is nearly always copyright. And of course this is something which we'll be talking about later, because copyright gives individuals particular proprietary rights over a particular instance of a cultural form. Okay. So what's this relationship between commodification through copyright and the identification of something as cultural heritage? Is it true that commodity value is what makes something cultural heritage? I hope not. And I want to say the answer to that question is no. Copyright and cultural heritage, there's a bit of a heckling going on here, so someone has to agree. Copyright and cultural heritage are different concepts. Not only do they express value in a different way, but they also control the meaning of value in a different way. Copyright is a private property right. Don't ever forget, it's not some cultural right. It's a private property right, and it expresses value in the marketplace. And that marketplace, in turn, exerts a significant control over the meaning of the way in which copyright, over the meaning of the value expressed by copyright. In this world of total market thinking, formal systems of property rights enjoy particular prestige, and the more valuable the right, the greater the prestige. However, if we want to have cultural practices that resist this reduction of everything to its value in the market, we also need to find a device that resists this commodification, this creeping propertization of everything, and proposes some alternative basis for expressing and controlling value. I think at the moment, the best bet we have for this type of resistance to the creeping propertization of everything is a more fully articulated concept of cultural heritage. We have a problem actually in law, and I know most people here are not lawyers, so I don't want to be too boring about this, which is everyone talks about cultural heritage, but it hardly exists in international law, but it's very hard to know what it is or what rights attach to it. So it's actually very poorly protected. So what a concept of cultural heritage can do is express and control value according to the norms and identity of a community, and not according to the market value of private property rights. Okay, none of this is to say, and I don't want to suggest otherwise, that copyrights are not valuable to individuals working in all areas of creative production. It gives individuals the possibility, extremely limited in most cases, but the possibility to gain economic benefit over their creative labour, and it also gives some measure of control, provided the copyright is not assigned away from the original creator, which is an important limitation. However, private property rights like copyright are not a route to building a community of cultural and creative value. Such a community needs to be built by a bottom-up commitment to the value of artistic practice, which then communicates that value to increasingly broader communities, of which the members are generally part. So people are generally part of one community, which itself is part of a larger community, and so forth. Okay, so moving to dance, and I'm almost finished. The fact that dance is a protected art form under copyright law was a consequence of its social acceptance as a creative and cultural form. And that social acceptance is relatively recent compared to other things like written works. As Francis Yeo, my former PhD student and a good friend, has documented, the dance community in general, however, tends to operate outside the formal architecture of copyright law, because copyright law serves the interests of the dance community poorly for a number of technical formal reasons. So what this demonstrates interestingly in the case of dance is that creative communities and dance communities in particular have had successful experience in building and controlling value outside the system of private property rights imposed by copyright law. So the cultural heritage of dance, rather than the private property relations of copyright, have tended to dominate cultural practice in dance, and still dominate actually much of the commercial practice in dance. for better or for worse, some might say. Okay, so if I could just finish by saying, it seems to me in the light of all this, the questions for the disabled dance community are about things like, first of all, how, bearing in mind our multiple identities and communities, the fact that disabled dancers may be a community, but they're also part of the community of dance generally and part of the creative community as well. How, bearing in mind these multiple identities and communities, the disabled dance community locates itself in relation to the community of dance in general, which I think is something which we've been speaking about a lot. Secondly, how can it use the heritage of the dance community to build value for its community outside this system of total market thinking that I mentioned? Thirdly, how can it build value for individual choreographers and dancers that is also capable of accessing the benefits of property rights conferred by copyright without undermining the rights that other members of the community have in their shared cultural heritage? If the disabled dance community, and it'll be interesting to hear in a sense whether when I use this expression disabled dance community, I'm using an expression which makes any sense to you. I mean, the project seems to be based on that, but it would be interesting to know if that's the case. If the disabled dance community can find good answers to these sorts of questions, then I think market thinking, this market thinking which hinges around commodification, ceases to be total, and it becomes just one of the artifacts in the ties that bind the community together. Thank you very much.
I think there's some very provocative questions at the end there, with a slightly bigger question as well, that we do need a more clearly articulated concept of cultural heritage in general, but we will come back to your questions. And we're going to move on to Ruth now.
Am I okay sitting here? I'm reading from my computer. Is that okay if I stay here? Is this mic working or is that all right? Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm really good to hear in our festival, so I got a very early train this morning, going back later on today. I haven't had as much time to really grapple with some of the big questions, and I thought I would actually answer this in a different way. But hearing everything that people are saying is making me go, oh, I should have said that, I should have said that. But we're going to go with what I prepared, I'm not talking as a programmer. I'm not responders to my Would You Dance Fest, but all these sort of regions that we're looking at here. But as a former dancer, and what bothers me as a reason affecting dance cultural heritage, and I think it's due to the absence of free and appreciated dancers. Things like how we mentor and support new talent, how our standards, values and thinking may prevent progress and continue to create artistic imbalance in dance performance. On Sunday at Belfast, we supported a new commission by Lisa Simpson called Brought to Life. It was beautifully constructed. The shaping, the music, the setting. It was stunning. I so loved her work. However, in a post-show discussion, it was commented that there was now a true equality between disabled and non-disabled dancers. I disagreed, and felt the comment was made as a statement that didn't invite or welcome any counter argument. To me, this is the book, and so I question this notion about our work being seen as equal and perceived as equal. I feel there are very few moments when true equality has been achieved on a dance floor between disabled and non-disabled dancers. This is, to me, not because I'm a disabled performer. I think, and I'm going to be a bit controversial here, it is more due to the trained dancer and their bodies. I think this affects our heritage and our presence in dance. So my talk is to offer another explanation as to why I feel we are invisible and not widely represented. When I started dance, quite late at the age of 23, I was free of any technical restraints in shaping. I received accolades and much praise as to how I used and played with my older but extremely flexible body. I wanted to develop in this arena, as at long last I had found my golden egg. The audition process to get into the dance school was really interesting. I enjoyed presenting my own creative piece, but then we had to undertake a series of tests. Now I know health and safety is important, but what remained with me at this point was how we had to have certain standardised elements in the way we used our bodies in order to proceed in dance. Bending the toes under, stretching down to explore the flat of our hands, turning our head from side to side, and stretching amongst other things. It didn't matter how good your performance, all that mattered was if your body could do these basic things. It was all about my physical conformity to become a typical dancer's body, the ballet body. I managed to succeed and pass tests, but as I undertook my training, I was constantly aware of how my body had to be corrected, shaped, amended, or correcting the idiosyncrasies that were uniquely me to work towards standards of an artistic ideal. My fear that once this has been achieved for the dancer, the body gets set, fixed, and this makes it ever so hard to break out of. Your technique as a dancer can determine how you interact from that point on. You can embed as second nature the way to move, to shape, to flow, to dance, and this causes a clash with many disabled bodies and performers. This non-conform body is left outside this standard, and this can bring with it a sense of failure, not feeling capable, and the opposite of what it can really mean to dance. These standards dominate in the performer's earliest start of dance education. I can understand why this is the case, but what bothers me is the inability of many trained dancers to let go when engaging with a non-conform body. They try and make them dance like they do. They go that extra bit in performance, that extra stretch, that extra poise, which can create an air of I am better than you. All performance is a group effort, yet I am often left with this distinct feeling of unease, like the non-disabled dancer has been used by people as a backdrop, or even worse, as props. Many disabled people don't ever get the opportunity to get to dance school, so their experience of dance is watching these guardians of dance, who usually try to get them to move like they do, or shape themselves according to their dance training. It makes the contrast even more extreme, the sense of failure heightened, which increases the divide of them and us. And this, I fear, spills out into the performance arena, which makes the non-disabled dancer always look more refined, more stretched, more in control, and usually to most people, always better. I know, because I've done it. The sense to be approved, to be praised, is a hard piece to harness. I yearn to see a disabled dancer to be made to feel comfortable within their own movements, that they ask a trained dancer to follow them and copy their peculiarities, change their trained styles to create work that allows more equality within the whole. That to me will challenge the choreographer and dancer to bring more equality to a performance, and encourage new dancers to understand that it is not what you know, but what you do with the body you have been given to make group performances work as a whole, and truly dispelling the them and us to just us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there's actually some very interesting provocations in there for what we've already heard from both Stina and Fiona, in as much as we've heard very positive things from Stina, and from Fiona we've had questions about locating disabled dancers within the community, and there are definite questions in there, I think, for what we've heard already. But before we go and explore those things, Jane, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you. Am I on? Yes. Right, I'm also coming from a slightly different background. I do come from the cultural heritage area, in the sense that obviously the Victorian Albert Museum in the Department of Theatre and Performance, we are now very concerned about how we do document intangible heritage. It's an odd department to be in. You look at ceramics and you say, well, you know what you've got. And they look at us and say, well, what stuff you've got. And we do have stuff that in a way represents what has survived. I would say that in the past the department had a fairly narrow focus, and I think that one of the concerns when I went there was that in terms of dance, our brief needed a great deal of enlarging. And so that's one of the things that I have tried to focus on. But one of the things I am very aware of is that there are numerous sort of branches, sectors of society that need representation in their own way. And it's something that we have to be sensitive to. I think we also are in a situation where we do have quite a lot of material that is absolutely invisible because there are areas that people have not really delved into. And I think the area of disability in dance is really one of those. Okay, when one sort of comes up with examples, they're probably examples that, you know, sort of fruit of rule and sort of other sort of variants. But it's not something that has just happened in the last 25 years that disabled people have performed on stage. And I've been to a number of conferences where that is very definitely the impression. I think it's very difficult to have a sense of linear development, except within the last 25 years. But I think in the same way, it's interesting, it's enlightening, and it's informative to actually have a sense of what was there. Of course, in the 19th century, anyone who was not perceived absolutely as the norm could be treated as a freak. And there was a real fascination. Some of you may have seen Tom Thumb on television last night. Absolutely typical, someone who was out of the ordinary and could be treated differently. But one of the things that actually struck me when I have sort of delved, and I haven't delved very deeply into disabled performers, but certainly in the mid-19th century, there was actually a fashion for one-legged dancers. And not so much just because they thought this was a sort of a freakish act. Some of the descriptions are written with actually intelligence that is unusual at the time we're writing about dance. As I say, there was a sort of fashion, and we're talking about performing on stages such as Covent Garden. We're not talking about just in a musical, which really does go sort of really quite widely. So there are sort of figures. There's a Spanish dancer called Donato who would sustain a dance on each one leg for over 10 minutes, and this really started the phase. But it is very much, at the moment, in terms of what one can find, relatively isolated. And I think this is largely because it's not an area that people have really started to look at. When one comes to the earlier part of the 20th century, again, one can sort of pick out rare examples, probably they were rare examples. I would say probably the most famous is actually with the Arcos Valley Bruce. And we tend not to think of, say, dance as being part of an organisation as such. But in 1920, Diaghilev brought to Paris and to London a group of Spanish dancers, one of whom was nicknamed the Legless. He performed on his trolley, and he also performed on his stumps. The Spanish ambassador in London decided that this was inappropriate, and he asked for the performances of Cuadro Flamenco to be banned on the ground of the fact that this was disrespectful to Spain. In fact, the dancer nicknamed Legless was removed from the production, which I think is a very sad reflection of the time, but the production did go on. It's one of those things, it has been hugely successful in Paris. London obviously was reacting differently. A couple of years ago, probably 3 years ago now, I had a phone call from somebody. I often get phone calls, people saying, we have a collection of material in our family, are you interested? So one sort of goes on and find out a bit more, and I would say that, you know, we're lucky sometimes, and sometimes it seems to be very run-of-the-mill. But in this case, it was a dancer called Phyllis Hann, And it was her nephew who had contacted us and said, might we be interested? I went along and I discovered that at long last, the mystery dancer who was referred to in Ninette Balwar's Come Dance With Me had a real identity. In Come Dance With Me, this is one of Balwar's autobiographies, she talks about when she first went to the Old Vic, and really her first task there was to work with the opera dancers. So this is pre-Vic Wells Ballet even. And she is very, very dismissive of the whole group, and sort of finishes her remarks by saying, one girl had a wooden hand, but Miss Bayliss informed me that an excellent kid glove was preserved for her special use. And that is all we have known about Phyllis Hand. You know, her name was just somebody who could be completely dismissed. But I find this, for example, really fascinating that there were people early in the 20th century who were determined to be part of the dance community. She trained with Teresa Hayman, who had been a dancer at the Alhambra, and she ultimately went on and became a dance teacher herself. Not letting her disability be anything of a problem. And so this sort of individual is the sort of person who interests us far more than somebody who is sort of reasonably successful doing the same old thing as 101 other people. We are on the lookout for different stories. And I think this is one of the things is that with dancers, we often don't have their voices and their stories. It is something that's quite difficult to document, and dance always is a nightmare in how do you preserve it in any way, and how can we sort of challenge what has been preserved, and how can we locate new material. In our Connecting Front policy, it is there to go as widely as possible, so it's not trying to repeat what we have, it's trying to complement what we have, and to reflect primarily what happens in the arts, in performing arts in this country, although not exclusively. We are much more international, particularly when it comes to dance and key areas. And so, although I think this is very much a hidden area at the moment within our collections, I think there is great potential for it to become very much more visible. So this is not a sort of provocative question in terms of, you know, how can we do it, although yes, we are interested in finding ways of documenting dance, and this whole area is just one of those, but it is something that is an area that we are interested in. I think there's a tendency for people to think, oh, the V&A is only interested in the upper echelons of performance. I would say that we have a very broad brief, and it's something that we need to build on. So I've enjoyed hearing everybody else's comments, giving me lots to think about, and also I hope that this has just added a little bit more to that. Thank you.
I think I was quite struck by your comment that this is not an area that people have started to look at. And to my questions spring to my mind: who are these people, and what does look at actually mean in order to get something sort of into our cultural heritage? Anyway, I'm not going to hold the floor, although I could. What I want to do now is to open up what has been said for questions, for comments, for disagreement, for agreement. Anything that might have struck you during the course of these presentations. We would like to hear from you now. Oh, sorry, I'll bring the mic down.
Hi, I'm Judy Gosling. I'm afraid I missed the first two speakers, but agreed with everything Ruth said. I just wanted to add a couple of quick points to Ruth and James. The Margaret Morris movement, I can't remember if that started in the 20s or 30s, but they always had an integrated curriculum and in fact still do an integrated dance qualification. So I think that's another kind of good historic one. I did have one experience very recently where we felt that disabled dancers genuinely were equal. And that was at the recent Community Dance Festival, Dance Around the World. I don't know who came to dance around the world. But essentially, it's at Cecil Sharp House. And then we have 2 days worth of dance where there's a different company perform every 20 minutes, and it's just continuous dance and continuous workshops. And it's looking at world dance companies, and of course London has all those different communities, so there's just literally, or more than 100 different dance traditions being shown from around the world from dance companies that are based in London and the South East. And we took in Folk in Motion, or in fact, we took in East London Wheelchair Dance Club, taught by Folk in Motion, which is my company. And we do an adapted form of English country dancing, which is quite multi-layered. It involves no body movement at all, only moving the wheelchair, and yet it's still dance. So that poses people a few questions to start with. We hark back to a tradition that didn't quite exist in East London, because in East London there was an awful lot of work done at the beginning of the English folk dance revival that has only recently been rediscovered, but it wasn't done by wheelchair users. So it's a kind of faux traditional company, but very much picking up the fact that in institutions wheelchair users have always danced. And we went in and we did our 20 minutes of adapted English folk dance. And yeah, I really felt like we were just showing our cultural tradition alongside everybody else's. And that was the feedback, you know, oh, I really like the way you did sex. Oh, it was really nice to hear the tune to Blade and Races. Usually if people are dancing it, you can't hear the music over the stamping. We love the arrangement. We really like the way the dancers acknowledge each other. That brings in that courtly tradition. I think there was only one person afterwards that sort of was pursuing all the dancers around asking what was wrong with them and just go away. So that was, I think, a rare moment and quite an important one. But apart from that, like I said, I would very much agree with Ruth.
Ruth, anything you want to say in response to that?
I mean, it is exciting that disabled people are able to start taking the lead and do some idea. The thing is, it's still, it's happening in response. It's not common. It's still the exception, not the rule. And we've still got a long way to go. I mean, there's so much you can answer in a question like this because of just pure access. So many good dance spaces are just not accessible and things like that. So we've got to encourage each other who are doing it to keep spreading more and influence each other. Thank you. Question out here?
More for Ruth, because I just particularly, again, everyone had wonderful intellects. I really enjoyed what I've heard so far. But Ruth particularly grand dancing. I'm lucky enough to work with Kanduko with their youth company. For me it's constant question about what are our paths into training for young disabled people, because I do think that there is an importance in finding the way to be your personal physical best, as well as your creative best. And I see that currently there aren't that many opportunities to access further training and questions around that. I kind of forget where I'm going with this. But I think there are ways of approaching physical technical training that are really important, that are not just about getting the ballet body, which equally I have real issues with. But similarly, I do believe that, for example, ballet has an awful lot to offer inclusive practice that is about what's going on internally in terms of Witter. I think Witter. I'm not going to. Yeah.
It's just it's a song, yeah. Because I think it's not saying 10 feet long. I think what's the hard is that we can get fixed in it, and we don't know how to be free from it. And I think we've got a responsibility to do that. And I like the phrase that Drew said before about dance is acknowledging each other. And that's what we've got to do, and not lord over, I'm better than you. And I think it's moving in the right way.
I've got one here to think about, and then I'm actually going to back, and then we'll come back to the audience.
Charlotte, can I also make a request?
Yes, of course, Caroline, yeah.
I am guessing that there is a man called Jörg Koch in the audience, and I'd like to call on him if he's there to talk about the work that he's done around universal design in response to, I think that was Kitty's question or comment.
Okay, can we just take 2 seconds, Caroline, because I've got one speaker that's just about to make a comment.
Great.
And then I wanted Stephen to say something, and then we'll do that, yeah? Is that all right? Okay.
Yeah.
Lois Keeper worked for the Conservatoire of Dance and Drama and as their quality university manager and an ex-trustee and Ducas from Identity as a disabled person. The argument about the physical body of a disabled dancer and access to the highest level of training is complicated, and we're still working on it, and there are some slow changes in the ballet body and so on. But I also want to say that it is challenging. I think staff in those schools have had very conventional training themselves, working towards it. But I also want to widen this out, because disabled doesn't just mean physically disabled. We have a lot of students who have social and complex learning, specific learning difficulties, dyslexia, with members of movement. We have a lot of students with mental health difficulties. We're training autistic students. We're training deaf students. We're training students with visual impairments. We don't have the widest lot. There is a long way to go. But I am a wheelchair user myself, as you can see in the know. So I'm the kind of symbol of a disabled person after I'm even on the toilet. But I have to have the awareness that, although one people think of a disabled person, they think of somebody who looks a little bit like me, and in other words, attached to a wheelchair. The definition is much wider than that, and I just want us to sort of remember that in the day. And although I wouldn't want to be in any way complacent, a lot of work around developing disability confidence in these top-level schools, dance and drama schools, is around that.
Yes, great. I wanted to respond back, and it will link into you, Caroline, I also think that a lot of non-disabled dancers are having an issue with how dance is taught in the conservatoires today, and actually what I think is Paducah, we find we have thousands of non-disabled dancers excited and feeling at home within our openness and how we look at dance, and is finding a new home for their body in terms of expressing their body. So I think there are major questions around dance training in general in the UK today, and the traditional approach to dance is changing. It's just that it's taking a long time for that to trickle into the actual practicality for the teachers to make that happen. But I think it's to acknowledge also that it's not just, and we said about sort of the wide definition of disability, but maybe we can think further. It's not just about disability, it's about good dance training for the whole of the ecology. And that's not taking away the folks who do need to put on the lack of access for emerging disabled people who want to access it. And of course, that's much easier for the general non-disabled person. But there is something to be said for the argument, not just being for the minority, but for being about a change in the majority of how we think about the training. And that's what I'd like maybe to comment a little bit with regards to his idea around universal design and his teaching in America over the last 10 years.
Well, thank you. I'm being given a soapbox here. And I'm also aware that dance and training and how the heritage of teaching dance is also one aspect. But that's not all we're talking about. We're talking about cultural heritage and disability cultural heritage in general, so maybe I can also make a swing back to that. But maybe just to take the point of my interest in universal design, for teaching a diversity of students. I prefer talking about the diversity of participants, of students, rather than sort of putting the spotlight on disabled students in terms of course, that they're included in the specific concerns and ideas about that as well. But moving from Kenduka into higher education, there was a challenge of making this training, the heritage of this training, applicable to this particular environment where disabled students or practitioners are not necessarily present. And sort of the struggle that when you come from an environment where you know who you're going to be teaching, then you can cater the methodologies for these particular people. In higher education, you do not necessarily know who you're going to be teaching and who's going to be present. And the challenge of finding ways that include everybody in the process, not making disabled participants accommodate and creating their own access in the process and working with accommodations constantly. And that's where universal design became a really important challenge in making that process equitable. And so devising processes where everybody in the room was creating and generating from their individual basis, but then moving from that individuality to how do we share this, how do we share this material, and also learn from each other. In practice, it probably gets a bit more complex than putting it into a couple of words. And I'd love to talk more about access to training for disabled artists or for a greater diversity of artists in dance practice. However, I just want to commend Sarah Rockley for taking up this topic, because as a dancer I'm challenged overall in terms of copyright, archive and heritage with something that is ephemeral. Stina brought that up. Then when we move into areas where we're non-traditional as well, these challenges get sort of accumulated as well. I think also what Ruth talked about, the challenge of shared authorship and shared practice versus single authorship. I think we always struggle with that. And also versus sort of an oral practice versus something that can be written down. And also looking around in the room, as a male, white, non-disabled practitioner, I'm very aware that a lot of the sort of groundbreaking movements in dance and in the arts are actually led by women, and I think you're well represented here. But again, that feminine aspect is also part of the challenge of why it isn't easily commodified archive. And just to round off, and I know it's a hard one to do, sort of bounce back this responsibility to the artist themselves and then back to education as well. How do I represent myself as an artist? What means have I got to archive and make available my own work? And I think for myself, I'm not a tech person per se, but hey, blessed be YouTube and the internet, where I can actually make my work available much broader than what I can do as an artist who works with an ephemeral art form and an ephemeral practice. And I think that needs to also then go back into education again. So what is the frame in which I present myself honestly as an artist, as what I do? Community dance practitioners, okay, you're not going to see me on stage, okay, I'm not going to be written about in the newspapers, so there's not going to be an archive for that, but I can represent myself, and how do I make my classes available, visible examples, etc. online as well. That has to be part of education as well, and I think this is going to be relevant for all artists that are being trained, but I think in particular for artists, and these are not just disabled artists, who work on the margins, who invent their own frames, who change what we think about dance and performance. Thank you.
I'll come back in a minute. I just wanted to pull a few sort of comments up from that, which was a very interesting input, because it raises then, particularly you can now disseminate your own work. Fabulous. But that then raises me questions about, well, does that mean it's cultural heritage? How does it then become part of education practices? Does it then become accepted as part of, sort of our curated cultural heritage, if you like? What do our institutions memory institutions do with things like, you know, sort of works that people put on the internet that would like to be disseminated further, that they would like to go into our educational practices and be held up as something that we aspire to. Those for me are all really interesting questions about where, you know, the cusp of where we are now in many ways, new forms of cultural heritage, how we make it, how we transmit it, what we accept is part of our cultural heritage. And those are some of the questions that we're really trying to needle out here.
Hi everyone. I just had a more kind of general question when I was thinking through some things as you were speaking most fabulously. How do we push for greater equality without sacrificing our own identity as disabled artists? How do we push for greater equality without sacrificing our own identity as disabled artists? So can we have our cake and eat it too?
Because I kind of, that's sort of the crux of my kind of talk was about. It's like, we always seem to go one way, and disabled artists are trying to achieve what dancers, trained dancers usually have, rather than appreciating the way a body will move and how you can work that into a dance. I mean, a few years ago we were able to work with Ivy Lasky, and her dance group came over from New York to fight Budapest. Catherine Long was in that show. And it was really interesting to hear how she was talking about how she pulls together a group of people. She sees people in the street or in events, and she likes the way they move and walk and brings them into a show and comes from that place, not necessarily from a trained dance perspective. And it's an interesting way, because I think the way to get it is to try those risky things, to try something new, to see where someone's coming from and think, because we all have creative ideas of what we think we want to work with, but very few of us will actually start to think, let's start from a different place and how we're trying to create work. I do want to see more equality in how we appreciate. I hate some of the words are so clumsy on disability. You know, on different. We're all part of the human race. We can all be dancers, but we've all got different ways of coming in with it. And we need to appreciate that and see how we can work together from that, not try and get other people to copy a certain style or a certain way. Just simple things to me that maybe provoked me into answering this. Because it is our cultural heritage, as I say, because you don't want to lose the unique way that we work, no matter what our intent is. Because we've all got a different approach to how we will do it. It's just that there was a mirrored moment in a recent dance where the artists that were the choreographer had asked them to have a position like this and move their hands out. And one was a disabled person with learning difficulties and one was a trained dancer. The trained dancer was out there, beautiful the way a trained dancer was, and the learning disabled person didn't have the same stretch. But I thought, why doesn't the trained dancer shadow the learning disabled performer? Why don't it always have to be one better? And it was that sort of challenge that got me thinking about why I don't feel we see enough equality and how we move together and work together. Just
I just wanted to say in relation to that it also depends what you mean by equality. And if I can talk about a thing which is relevant to me as a middle-aged woman, since I can remember the days when women didn't have formal equality in the workplace, that saying that you want to have equality doesn't mean that you want to be the same as other people. I don't want to be the same as a man. I want to be a woman. It's just that there are certain ways in which I want to have equality, and things like equality of access to the workplace, equality of benefits, and so forth. So I think also having equality doesn't mean losing identity. And indeed that's important in many movements, in many types of places where identity is very important to forming community.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment briefly back to Ruth in the sense that I think that there are many choreographers in the current moment in time that do embrace what the dancers offer them, and actually do look for that difference. And from a point of view of having been a dancer, a non-disabled dancer, you can do go often feeling completely at the other end of not being able to offer anything unique or different because I was that trained body. And how did I come up with something that was going to catch the attention of the choreographer that had other dancers in the room that came up with much more interesting things? So again, I'm talking about a very small society of 7 dancers and not about necessarily the general, but I do think that there's the exciting work that happens at this moment in time in contemporary dance is the work that is challenging the norm and that is challenging the traditional dance body. And as much as there is definitely still the image of the traditional dance body within dance, and my sense from within is that the companies that are making work that is challenging the art form and driving the art form forward is on that cusp of saying, yes, it is interesting to have people of different sizes, of different ages, of different backgrounds, different trainings, and that is what's going to evolve the art form to happen. And hopefully that diversity then picks up everybody and allows people both to have their individual as the kind of the uniqueness of their expression, that the working conditions is about equality. The working conditions is about creating the inclusive working environment so people can be allowed and have the starting point to offer their skills, their abilities, their talent to be worked with. And I think the choreographers that come and work with us, hopefully that is what happens when they go back to their own work. They change, have a different perspective of who they could be working with, so far as they have actually engaged some of our dancers within their other usual projects. So again, that's my way of thinking that dance and disability doesn't become ghettoized, doesn't just sit in one place, that it does penetrate. as Caroline said, it doesn't sit in one genre, it doesn't. It sits completely across the whole society. Yeah.
Okay, I've got one question there. I've been told but we've got just got a couple more questions, that's all, because I don't want to stop debate. One here, and then one there. Okay? Yep.
And there's a little bit of a so do another stuff in my place. It's just a more of a general question but still linked with quality. So I graduated from dancing not so long ago, and I found it really difficult to try and grasp on, I guess, the ballet body because I started quite late as well. I started when I was 16. But I've gathered now doing more community dance that's a lot more equal than compared to dance and education. And like what you said, Ruth, that sometimes the language can be a bit clumsy. Do you think that we would ever get the way of trying to not remodel, but just adapt and kind of, I don't know, make it more, not sensitive, but just more comfortable for everyone to talk about differences and equality? Because I feel like in education, the language is very much, this is what you're meant to be, you're not there, try and be that. Whereas in community dance, it's more, that's what we're told we're meant to be, but we're all different and we're all going to maximise ourselves rather than try and be something else. Does that make sense? And I just wanted to know what your thoughts on that was.
Again, coming up with this answer all the time about the training body and the training sections and that route and what we can do in community dance. Community dance can be a lot more freer, but I think we have to be careful that keeps the dance going in to really think about freeing people and not just a nice performance with these safe people and then move on. So it's different attitudes in different places. It's really hard in terms of we're not getting consistency. It's fantastic from Duco, we're training people and we're starting to see how we can influence thinking of what is possible, but we're still not doing it enough. And we've got to keep on. I think we're just on the tip of starting to really change and challenge thinking. But until we actually get in the West End corners like that, there's a real representation of people. Anyway, we've still got an awful long way to go in terms of what we're trying to do within an arts funded sector. We've got equality measures that we've been asked to work with, and so we understand things about diversity, but it's how we translate that into the mainstream life. We're just not managing to do that. There's a long way to go.
I'm trying to be brief. I just want to say thank you all for this day, because I'm sitting with I'm a dance therapist, I work in a local authority for people with learning disability. And the challenge that I'm sharing with you is I've done this for 12 years, and the reason I'm doing dance in the community from this angle is that I felt the training of a dance therapist enabled me to get equipped to work with individuals who have different experiences of life and to be able to be present to the difference in a genuine way and in a resourced way. So that's been my angle. But we are facing this year significant cuts, and people that I work with are not community dancers. They don't perform, but they use dance as a means of expressing themselves on a weekly basis and as a way of connecting with their spirit, with their life force. And I think that part of the challenge at the moment is that the basic needs of a lot of people with disabilities are not being met. There is a huge challenge for the basics to be met, to enable then this moment of the day, of the week, of the month, of creativity to be possible. And maybe that's one question I would like to give back to you is, who are you going to give this question back to for the money? You know, we're talking about money a little bit here as well. For the money to really filter down in a real way to the people who need it. That's more a point than a question, or maybe it's a question. Thank you.
Thank you. And one last one here. Yeah, I wanted to frame two questions. There's the question of cultural heritage that
There are two questions of cultural heritage that you raised, Fiona. One is the nature of the community, and you raised a community and a cultural heritage, which is the history and culture of disabled people themselves, which the museum are very slowly beginning to address, and it's a very important element in this. And I'm very struck throughout the whole conversation we're talking about very real inequalities, very real difficulties. But we're also forgetting something that Caroline said. When she puts on Frida, and people at Edinburgh Festival don't go there to see her work. There's an awful lot of people who see dance is irrelevant to what they do. And there's a real strength in the work of a number of choreographers and the work of the sort of stuff we're talking about with World Dance, which people, in terms of a valued heritage, which is dance, that disabled women will become leaders in attracting people into that. We mustn't forget that the dance world is very small, very precious, and very limited.
Very much. On that point, Sally, I'm going to have to finish with the questions. I think we've had a very interesting opening session, really quite a provocative opening session. I think there is some discussion going on here. There is discussion going on here at different levels. We've been very concerned with the equality issues. We're also looking at the legal frameworks. And in some way, it's partly our job, but we need to get these together because I think the legal frameworks are actually relevant and important to equality, to what is actually going on the ground as well. One of the things that my colleagues have said to me since we started this project, a constant refrain has been, nothing has changed for the last 10, 15 years. Ruth has said we're actually here at a tipping point at the moment. I think there might be a tipping point coming. Just so that we might be on the cusp of something. And I would like to take a challenge then. Let's find out, what we need to do to get over that tipping point by the end of the day. So we actually go beyond it. We're not sitting on it anymore, but we've gone beyond it, and we know actually what we need to do in order to make dance more equal, and also a much more embedded part of our cultural heritage. And there'll be two panels this afternoon to help you think about that. One, a legal panel. It's not boring, it's very interesting. And the other one around audience engagement. And we want to know from you at the end of the day as well, whether we are actually asking the right questions. Have we got to that tipping point? How does it over that tipping point? Let's help you get over that tipping point. Let's go over it
And with that, I think we'll go for lunch.
No.